Jimmy Fallon speechless when Oprah suddenly stops mid-sentence after hearing this voice that night on the Tonight Show stage. Oprah Winfrey stopped talking. Not at the end of a thought, not after a pause. Mid-sentence. She was looking directly at Jimmy Fallon, and then she wasn't. Her eyes went somewhere else entirely. 300 people in that studio watched one of the most powerful communicators alive lose every single word she had ever known. Jimmy Fallon leaned forward in his chair. He didn't make a joke. He didn't say anything. He just watched. And the entire studio watched with him. It was a Thursday evening in November. The Tonight Show was taping its regular run, the kind of night the producers call a good booking. Oprah Winfrey was in the chair across from Jimmy Fallon for the first time in 4 years, promoting nothing in particular, which always makes for the best conversations. The audience had lined up outside 30 Rock since early that afternoon, retirees mostly, couples in their 60s who had driven in from New Jersey and Connecticut. Women who remembered watching Oprah on television in kitchens where the afternoon light came in at that particular angle. They weren't there for a segment. They were there for her. The studio was warm and the band was loose, and everything, as the Tonight Show producers will tell you, was exactly right. The segment producer later said she had worked in television for 19 years and had never seen a taping go sideways so completely, so quietly, and so beautifully, all at once. The control room still talks about what happened that night. Oprah was midway through a story, something about a conversation she'd had recently, something she'd been thinking about. Her hands moving the way they always do when she's building toward a point. Jimmy was leaning in, the way he does when a guest is saying something real. And then the sound came from somewhere off stage. Not loud, not performed, not arranged. Just a voice. Old, cracked slightly at the edges, the way a voice gets when it has been carrying something for a long time. It lasted no more than 4 seconds, and Oprah Winfrey stopped mid-sentence. Her hand, which had been gesturing, went still in the air. Her eyes moved toward the sound like a compass needle finding north after decades of spinning. Jimmy saw her face change. He recognized the kind of change that doesn't have a name in television. He leaned forward and said, almost a whisper, "Oprah, you all right?" The entire studio froze. For a moment, the audience thought it might be something medical. She was 70. She had been talking at full speed. A few people near the front reached for each other without thinking. Was she dizzy? Had something gone wrong? The band stopped without being told to. Questlove's drumsticks went still. The director in the booth didn't cut to commercial. Oprah's lips were parted as if the next word was still somewhere behind them, waiting. 300 people held their breath. Then, barely above a whisper but caught perfectly by her microphone, she said one word. A name. Ida. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1963. Oprah Winfrey wasn't always Oprah Winfrey, icon and voice of a generation. In the spring of 1963, in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, a 9-year-old girl named Oprah Gail Winfrey was living with her grandmother on a farm that didn't have indoor plumbing. She was already reading, already speaking in full sentences that startled adults. Her grandmother, Hattie Mae, had taken her to the local church every Sunday since before she could form the words. It was at that church, on a Wednesday evening in April, that Oprah first heard Ida Pearl Watkins sing. Ida was 51 years old. She had been the church's choir director for 23 years. She was the kind of woman who ironed her church clothes on Saturday night, and whose voice, when it opened up, made people feel that something they had been afraid to feel was allowed. She was a former school teacher who had lost her classroom position in 1958 when the local school board eliminated the Negro school and her contract was not renewed. She had spent the 5 years since teaching music out of her living room to children whose parents could afford 50 cents a lesson, and some who could not afford anything at all. She'd taught them all anyway. She had come alone to that Wednesday service because her husband had passed the previous October, and she had not yet decided how to carry that. Oprah sat in the third pew and listened to Ida sing the opening hymn. She remembers it was warm that evening, and the windows were open, and there were moths at the screen. What she cannot explain, and has tried to explain many times since, is what happened in her body when Ida's voice entered the room. It wasn't just music. It was permission. Permission to take up space. Permission to be heard. Permission to believe that what was inside her was worth giving to other people. After the service, Oprah waited. All the adults had filed out, and the girl was still sitting there, and Ida came over and sat down beside her. "You have something in you," Ida said. She didn't elaborate. She just said it the way you say something you've known for a while. They sat together in that warm church for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing consequential and everything that mattered. Ida had a small reel-to-reel recorder she carried for teaching purposes. She had been recording herself that week to check her breathing technique. She played a small piece of it for Oprah, just her own voice, unaccompanied, a few bars of an old hymn. When it was done, Oprah reached out and touched the machine. "Does the recording keep it?" she asked. Ida said yes. Always, and she pressed record again and sang 4 more bars, slowly, so Oprah could feel them land. Then she handed the girl the small spool of tape. "Carry it until you don't need it anymore," she said. Oprah carried it for 41 years. The tape moved with her from Mississippi to Nashville, to Baltimore to Chicago. It sat in a shoebox through every version of her life. By the time she was 40, she had staff members who organized her correspondence and her travel and her schedule, and still she kept the box herself. She never played the tape publicly. It wasn't for that. It was the kind of thing you keep, because losing it would mean losing access to the person you were before you became who you are. And some people understand that you cannot afford to lose that. Ida Pearl Watkins died in 2003 at 91 years old in Kosciuszko, Mississippi. Her family sent Oprah a handwritten letter. Oprah sent flowers and did not attend the service because she thought her presence would make it about her, and she did not want it to be about her. She thought about Ida when she gave speeches. She thought about her when she interviewed people who were just beginning. She thought about her especially on the occasions when someone young and scared sat across from her and she had to decide how much to give. And she always gave everything, because that is what Ida had done for her in a warm church in 1963. Ida's daughter, a woman named Celestine Watkins Monroe, had been corresponding with a Tonight Show producer for 8 months. She had found, in her mother's house after her death, the original reel-to-reel machine. And on a small tape, labeled in her mother's careful handwriting, was a recording. 4 bars of a hymn, sung slowly, for a child. In 1963, Celestine was 73 years old and had been diagnosed with congestive heart failure earlier that year. She had driven to New York alone, from Mississippi, on a bus, because she said she had made her mother a promise to find the person that tape belonged to. Tonight Show staff had been told only that a guest was in the audience with something connected to a segment guest. They had not been told what it was. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Oprah had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. She had known for 3 weeks that Celestine was coming. The Tonight Show producer had looped her in before confirming the booking. She had asked only one thing, that the tape be played from offstage, without introduction, while she was mid-conversation. She wanted to feel it the way she felt it the first time. Without preparation. Without performance. She told no one on the show's staff what would happen when she heard it. She didn't entirely know herself, but this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. The voice on the tape, 4 bars, unaccompanied, the edges worn with time, had stopped Oprah mid-sentence. And now, from the far aisle of the studio audience, an elderly woman in a yellow dress was making her way slowly toward the stage, holding a small wooden box in both hands. Celestine Watkins Monroe, 73 years old, heart failing, from Mississippi, 1,200 miles on a bus, because she had made her mother a promise. Oprah stood up from the chair. She stood up without thinking, the way you stand for something that requires you to be fully vertical. Jimmy Fallon also stood, and then sat back down, and then stood again, and said, "Folks, I think we need to let this happen." Celestine reached the base of the stage, and a stagehand moved to help her up the steps. She was breathing carefully, the way people do when their hearts are working harder than they should have to. She looked at Oprah, and Oprah looked at her, and neither of them spoke for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then, Celestine held out the wooden box. "She kept everything you ever gave her," Celestine said. Her voice was low and steady. Every letter. Every time you mentioned her on television, she cut it out. She had a whole folder. Oprah's hands were shaking as she took the box. She said you sat with her after everyone else left. Oprah opened the box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was the original reel-to-reel tape. The label in Hattie, in Ida's handwriting, read simply, "For the girl who stayed." "She kept it," Oprah said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "She kept it. She said you were the first person she ever recorded for who she knew would change the world." Oprah pressed her hand to her mouth. Then she looked at Celestine directly. "I'm so sorry I didn't find her sooner." "She wasn't looking to be found," Celestine said. "She was looking to give." Jimmy Fallon had come around from behind the desk. He was standing at the edge of the stage, not speaking, arms at his sides, watching. Questlove had stood up from the drum kit. The director in the booth had not cut to commercial. The cameraman closest to the stage did not pull back. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Oprah asked. "I had to be sure I could make the trip," Celestine said. Simply, "The doctors gave me until spring." She said it without drama, the way people say things they have already made their peace with. Oprah stepped forward and held her. Not the kind of hold that is for cameras, the kind that is for someone who has carried something a long way and has finally been allowed to put it down. The standing ovation started somewhere in the middle of the audience and moved outward like a wave, the way sound moves when it finally finds the room it was meant for. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 11 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in March, Celestine Watkins Monroe passed away in her daughter's house in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, in the same town where her mother had once sung in a church with the windows open and the moths at the screen. She was surrounded by family. Oprah sent flowers and a letter, and this time she also sent a recording, her own voice, just her speaking, saying the things she had wanted Ida to know and had never said in time. The wooden box and the original tape now sit in the permanent collection of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., in a case with a small card that reads, "Given by a daughter. Kept by a girl. Returned to the world." Jimmy Fallon kept a photograph from that night on his desk for the rest of that season. He never used it in a segment. It was just there. A woman in a yellow dress. A wooden box. And the particular way a room looks when 300 people are holding their breath and have forgotten entirely that they are on television. Some voices travel 40 years before they find the ear they were always meant for.